"You don't belong here." The 5 words, spoken with the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to absolute authority, hung in the climate-controlled air of the first-class cabin. Captain Alan Sterling, a man whose silver hair and chiseled jaw seemed forged from the very concept of command, looked down his patrician nose at the young woman in seat 2B. He saw only what he wanted to see: a black woman, barely out of her 20s, dressed in a grease-stained aviation jacket and worn denim. He didn't see the calloused strength in her hands, the kind that came from handling tools, not handbags. He didn't see the quiet, analytical intelligence in her dark eyes, which were currently assessing the cabin's emergency exit mechanism with practiced ease. And most critically, he failed to comprehend that her name, Eleanor Vance, wasn't just printed on a boarding pass. It was engraved on the very soul of the airline he flew for. This wasn't just a dispute over a seat. It was the final stress test for a legacy, and the turbulence was about to tear the wings off a 30-year career. When the woman who built the engines gets treated like a stowaway, the final descent isn't just a landing, it's a reckoning. The morning had begun with the familiar, comforting scent of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel at a private hangar in Burbank. Eleanor "Ellie" Vance had spent 3 hours with the lead mechanic for Majestic Airlines' West Coast fleet, her hands deep in the guts of a Rolls-Royce Trent 7000 engine. Her father, the late great James Vance, had founded Majestic 40 years ago, with 2 leased planes and a philosophy. The heart of an airline isn't in the boardroom, it's in the engine block and with the people who keep it turning. Ellie had inherited his passion, his mechanical aptitude, and, as of 6 months ago, his 62% controlling stake in the company. She still wore the jacket from the hangar, a navy blue bomber with a faded Vance Aviation patch on the chest, the original name of her father's first repair company. To the untrained eye, she looked like a member of the ground crew who'd gotten lucky with a last-minute upgrade. To a trained eye, however, the details were there. Her worn leather boots were custom-made for durability and comfort, costing more than the average business-class ticket. The schematics peeking out of her canvas satchel were not idle reading. They were proprietary engine modifications she was developing herself. But Captain Alan Sterling was not a man with a trained eye for people. He saw the world through the narrow cockpit window of his own prejudice. He was a former Air Force colonel, a man who believed hierarchy was the natural order of the universe. In his mind, first class was a sanctuary for a certain type of person, wealthy, white, and deferential to his authority. Ellie fit none of these criteria. He had noticed her in the exclusive Polaris lounge at LAX, a frown creasing his brow. She was sitting in a corner, not sipping champagne, but drinking black coffee and making notes on a heavily marked-up technical manual. He had dismissed her as an anomaly, a clerical error. Now, seeing her on his aircraft, in his cabin, felt like a personal affront. The flight was MA212, a flagship route from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. Ellie had booked seat 2B specifically. It offered a clear view of the wing and the engine housing, allowing her to observe the performance during takeoff and cruising altitude. She was on her way to her first official shareholder meeting as CEO, a role she had been hesitant to assume. The board, a collection of her father's old, cigar-chomping contemporaries, saw her as a figurehead, a girl playing in her daddy's sandbox. They had appointed a chief operating officer, a slick corporate veteran named Ben Carter, to guide her. Carter was polite, but his skepticism was a palpable force in every video call. This flight was her last chance to observe her company from the ground up, or rather, from 35,000 feet up, before she walked into that boardroom. She was settling into the plush leather, her mind tracing the fuel lines in the diagrams she'd just reviewed when the problem arrived in the form of Senator Harrison Albright, a pompous, red-faced man who treated the aisle like his own personal parade ground. He stopped at her row, his gaze sweeping over her with distaste. "Excuse me," he boomed, to no one in particular. "There seems to be an error. This is my seat." A young flight attendant named Chloe, her smile strained, hurried over. "Senator Albright, welcome aboard. Let me see your boarding pass." She glanced at it. "Sir, it says you're in 3B, right behind this seat." "Nonsense," the senator huffed, waving a dismissive hand. "My office always books me in row 2. Always. I need the legroom for my work." He glared at Ellie. Perhaps this young lady would be more comfortable elsewhere. Ellie looked up, her expression unreadable. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I booked this specific seat for a reason." Before Chloe could mediate, Captain Sterling emerged from the cockpit, his very presence sucking the air out of the cabin. He moved with the unhurried swagger of a man who had never been told no. "Is there a problem here, Senator?" Sterling asked, his voice a smooth baritone that dripped with feigned concern. He completely ignored Ellie. "Alan, good to see you," the senator said, clapping Sterling on the shoulder. "Just a small mix-up. It seems your airline has placed this person in my preferred seat." The word person was loaded with a dismissive weight that made Ellie's jaw tighten. Sterling finally turned his gaze on her, and the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial frost. "Miss," he said, not bothering to ask for her name, "let me see your boarding pass." Ellie produced it from her jacket pocket. Sterling took it, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. He barely glanced at the name. "I see," he said, his tone condescending. "Well, there's been an override. Senator Albright is one of our most valued customers. His status requires certain accommodations." "My paid ticket for this specific seat is a contract," Ellie stated, her voice still level. "Airline policy doesn't allow for involuntary downgrades based on another passenger's status." She knew the company's contract of carriage by heart. She had helped her father redraft a section of it 2 years ago. Sterling's lip curled into a sneer. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, demeaning whisper. "Listen, let's not make this difficult. I see the jacket. You're ground crew, right? Maintenance. Someone probably did you a favor getting you this seat. Don't abuse it. We have a perfectly good seat for you in Economy Plus. Row 24. You'll still have a window." "I am not ground crew," Ellie said, the words precise and cold. "And I am not moving," the senator scoffed. "The audacity. Alan, handle this. I have calls to make before we take off." The flight attendant, Chloe, stepped forward, her face pale. "Captain, the manifest is confirmed. Miss Vance is the ticketed passenger. We can't—" "Quiet, Chloe," Sterling snapped, without looking at her. He focused his glare back on Ellie. "You are now delaying the departure of a federal aircraft. I am the captain. My authority here is final. You will move to seat 24A, or I will have you removed from this plane for failing to comply with crew instructions. Those are your only options." Ellie looked at him. She saw the years of unchecked ego, the corrosive entitlement. She saw a rot that went far deeper than one arrogant pilot. This was a symptom of the disease she had come to cure. Revealing herself now would be a short, satisfying burst of fireworks. He would grovel, apologize, and the system would remain unchanged. No, she needed to let him complete his arc. She needed to give him enough rope to hang his entire career. Slowly, deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. She was taller than he expected, meeting his gaze directly. "Fine," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I will move." But I want this officially logged. I am moving under protest. I require your full name and employee identification number, Captain." Sterling actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a business card, flicking it at her. It fluttered and landed on the seat she had just vacated. "Pick it up," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "And take your bag with you. It's cluttering the aisle." Ellie held his gaze for a long moment before bending down to retrieve the card. Captain Alan Sterling, Chief Pilot, Transcontinental Fleet. She picked up her canvas satchel. "Thank you, Captain," she said, the words chillingly polite. "I will be in touch." "I'm sure you will," he smirked. "Now hurry along. Enjoy the view from the cheap seats." As Senator Albright settled into 2B with a triumphant sigh, Ellie began the long walk back. Every eye in first and business class was on her. She felt their pity, their second-hand embarrassment, their relief that the confrontation was over. The curtain to economy was pulled shut behind her with a sharp tug, a final act of separation. Seat 24A was not perfectly good. It was a middle seat. The manifest had been updated, and her window seat was already given to a standby passenger. She was wedged between a man who smelled of stale beer and a woman who immediately colonized the shared armrest. The air was stuffy, thick with the scent of microwaved burritos and anxiety. Ellie squeezed her satchel under the seat in front of her. She took a deep breath, the anger a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She pulled out her phone. They were still at the gate. The Wi-Fi wasn't active yet, but she had a strong 5G signal. She opened a secure messaging app and sent a text to a single contact. Ben Carter. "Change of plans for the DC meeting. I need you to do 3 things for me immediately. First, pull the complete personnel file for Captain Alan Sterling, Flight MA212. I want every commendation, every complaint, every flight review. Second, I need the full passenger manifest and the audio from the gate agent's log for this flight. Third, assemble the entire executive board for an emergency meeting. Not at headquarters, at the private hangar at Dulles. Tell them to meet flight MA212 on the tarmac. I don't care what you have to tell them to get them there." Carter's reply was almost instantaneous. "Ellie, what's going on? Has there been an incident? The board won't assemble on the tarmac without a level 1 security or safety reason." Ellie looked toward the front of the plane, where Sterling's voice was now smoothly welcoming the first-class passengers and promising a swift, on-time departure. "Tell them it's a level 1 leadership failure," she typed back. "And Ben, prepare a notice of termination." The 8-hour flight was a masterclass in systemic dysfunction. Word had clearly trickled down from the cockpit. The woman in 24A was a problem. When the drink cart came by, the flight attendant, a different one, a world-weary man named Gary, skipped her row entirely. When she used the call button to request a glass of water, it took 45 minutes for anyone to respond, and it was Chloe, the young attendant from first class, who brought it with a whispered, fearful apology. Ellie didn't complain. She observed. She documented. She noted the cracked plastic on the tray table, the non-functional USB port, the threadbare carpet. These weren't just signs of wear and tear. They were signs of neglect, of a corporate culture that viewed its main customer base as an inconvenience. Her father had always said, "You can judge the health of an airline by the cleanliness of its economy lavatories." Based on that metric, Majestic Airlines was terminally ill. 2 hours into the flight, the paid Wi-Fi finally sputtered to life. Ellie paid the exorbitant fee and logged in. She didn't go to news sites or social media. She navigated to Majestic's internal operations server. As the majority shareholder and acting CEO, She had root access credentials that her father had insisted she memorize years ago. "Never let anyone lock you out of your own house," he'd told her. She bypassed the public-facing portals and entered the maintenance and operations mainframe. The screen of her phone glowed with raw data. She pulled up the real-time telemetry for MA22. Her eyes, trained by years of study, scanned the columns of numbers. Engine temperature, fuel flow, cabin pressure, all normal. But then she saw the flight path data. Sterling was flying aggressively, chasing tailwinds that were causing minor but persistent turbulence, all to shave a few minutes off the flight time. It was a common practice among arrogant pilots, a way to boast about on-time performance, but it increased passenger discomfort and put unnecessary stress on the airframe. It was cowboy behavior. She cross-referenced his flight history. A pattern emerged. Sterling consistently flew more aggressively than company guidelines recommended. There were 2 internal flags on his record for exceeding G-force parameters on approach, both dismissed by his superiors as within acceptable limits for weather conditions. Ellie knew better. This was a pilot who treated a multi-million-dollar aircraft like a sports car. Then she found the jackpot. The ACARS, Aircraft Communications, Addressing and Reporting System, logs. It was a text-based communication system between the cockpit and the ground. She scrolled through the messages for MA202. 20 minutes ago, Sterling had sent a message to the dispatch supervisor at Dulles. Sterling, MA212. Request priority gate assignment and ground support. Have Senator Albright on board. Also, require law enforcement presence at gate upon arrival. Have a disruptive passenger, non-compliant with crew instructions. Name Eleanor Vance. Will need her escorted from the premises to file a report. The cold knot in Ellie's stomach turned to ice. He wasn't just covering his tracks. He was escalating. He was going to use the authority of law enforcement to validate his lie, to humiliate her publicly, and create a formal record of her being a problem. He was trying to ruin her credibility before she could even file a complaint. She switched back to her secure messaging app. Ellie to Ben Carter. New development. Sterling has requested police at the gate to have me arrested for being disruptive. You need to intercept this. Call the airport authority director. Use my name. Tell him to have his officers stand by, but they are not to engage with Captain Sterling or the passenger. They will await direct orders from you on the tarmac. This is no longer a personnel issue. This is an attempted abuse of power. There was a pause. For a moment, Ellie wondered if she had pushed Ben too far, if his corporate caution would win out. Then his reply came. Carter. Understood. I've spoken to the director. He's a friend of your father's. The Port Authority police will be there, but they will report to me. The board is en route to the hangar. They think there's been a hijacking attempt. What are your instructions for Sterling? Ellie looked at the back of the seat in front of her, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time that day. Let him walk right into it, she typed. Let him think he's the king of the sky, right up until the moment he hits the ground. The cockpit of the Airbus A330 was a serene bubble of glowing screens and quiet hums as they began their descent into the hazy skies over Virginia. Captain Alan Sterling felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had handled the situation with the disruptive woman perfectly. He had asserted his authority, protected a valuable client, and was now about to deliver the senator to his destination ahead of schedule. He was the master of his domain. Smooth ride in, Tim, he said to his first officer, a young, nervous man named Tim Rollins. Tim had been unusually quiet ever since the incident in the cabin. A bit bumpy over the Rockies, Captain, Tim murmured, not taking his eyes off the instruments. We could have climbed to 37,000 to get above that sheer. And burn an extra 200 gallons of fuel? Sterling scoffed. We pushed through it. That's what Majestic pays us for. Efficiency. Results. You learn that, kid, and you'll go far. Tim swallowed. Captain, I checked the ticketing log. The passenger in 2B, Miss Vance, she wasn't an upgrade. It was a full-fare, first-class ticket, purchased 3 months ago. What we did, it's a serious violation of the contract of carriage. Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Contract of carriage? Son, let me tell you what the real contract is. We fly powerful people safely and comfortably. That's it. Everything else is just paper. I made a command decision. The paperwork will reflect that I de-escalated a potential security threat. My word against some disgruntled girl in a mechanic's jacket. Who do you think the board is going to believe? The radio crackled. Majestic 212. Heavy, this is Dulles Tower. Be advised your gate has been changed. You are cleared for approach on runway 1 right. Taxi to private hangar 7. I repeat, hangar 7. Sterling frowned. Hangar 7? That was the executive hangar, reserved for private jets and unscheduled maintenance. Tower, confirm hangar 7 for Majestic 212. That's affirmative, Majestic 212. Ground teams are standing by. Sterling's confusion quickly morphed back into ego. Hear that, Tim? He said with a grin. They're rolling out the red carpet for the senator. Hangar 7. No riffraff, no crowded terminal. This is what I'm talking about. You take care of the important people, and the company takes care of you. Back in row 24, the cabin was abuzz with confusion as the plane taxied past the familiar terminal buildings. Ellie remained silent, her gaze fixed out the window. She saw it all, the fleet of black SUVs parked in a precise line on the tarmac, the flashing lights of 2 Port Authority police cars, and a small group of men in dark suits standing near the hangar doors, their forms silhouetted against the harsh floodlights. At the center of the group stood Ben Carter, his shoulders squared, holding a tablet. The intercom chimed one last time. Folks, this is Captain Sterling. A little surprise for our arrival. Due to a special request, we'll be deplaning at a private facility. We ask that all passengers remain seated until our VIP guest and law enforcement have disembarked. Thank you for your patience. A murmur rippled through the economy cabin. People craned their necks, trying to see what was happening. The man next to Ellie leaned over. Police? What do you think she did? He whispered to his wife, gesturing with his head toward Ellie. Ellie met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I think, she said calmly, we're all about to find out. The engines spooled down with a final, mournful whine. The fasten seatbelt sign blinked off. From the front of the plane, Sterling's voice could be heard, jovial and commanding. Senator Albright, right this way. Allow me to escort you personally. Chloe, her face a mask of anxiety, opened the main cabin door. The mobile stairs were already in place. Captain Sterling stepped out onto the platform, beaming, with Senator Albright just behind him, preening for the reception he believed was for him. He took a deep breath of the humid Virginia air and started down the stairs. He expected to be greeted by a junior executive or a protocol officer. Instead, he was met by the cold, disappointed eyes of Ben Carter and the entire executive board of Majestic Airlines. Sterling's stride faltered on the 3rd step. He recognized the faces from corporate newsletters, the CFO, the head of marketing, the general counsel. His confident smile tightened into a knot of confusion. Ben, he called out, forcing a jovial tone. What's all this? Quite the welcome for the senator. Ben Carter didn't smile. He didn't move. He simply stared at Sterling, his expression grim. The welcome is not for the senator, Alan. Sterling reached the bottom of the stairs, his confusion curdling into unease. What's going on? Is there a problem? There are several. Carter said, his voice flat and cold. He held up his tablet. I have your ACAR's message here. You requested law enforcement to deal with a disruptive passenger. Where is she? Yes, of course, Sterling said, regaining a sliver of his bravado. He gestured back at the plane. She's in the back. Seat 24A. A woman named Vance. Caused a scene during boarding, refused to comply with instructions. I had to move her for the safety and comfort of the other passengers. He looked pointedly at the 2 police officers standing nearby. Officers, she's ready to be escorted off. The officers didn't move. They looked at Ben Carter, awaiting his command. You moved her from seat 2B? Carter asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I did. To accommodate Senator Albright. A command decision, Sterling said, puffing out his chest. A command decision, Carter repeated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He looked at the other board members who were now staring at Sterling as if he were a ghost. Senator Albright, sensing the mood had shifted, stepped forward. Now see here. What is the meaning of this? I am a United States Senator. Captain Sterling was acting on my behalf. He provided excellent service. Senator, Carter said, finally turning to him, your excellent service has just become a multi-million-dollar liability for this company. But that's not the primary issue we're here to discuss. He turned his gaze from the senator, past Sterling, and up toward the open door of the aircraft. We are here to welcome the new chairwoman of the board and acting CEO of Majestic Airlines. Sterling's blood ran cold. The new CEO? What are you talking about? James Vance is... He trailed off. James Vance passed away 6 months ago, Carter said. His controlling interest, his seat on the board, and his entire legacy were passed to his sole heir. She's been running the company from behind the scenes for months, preparing to take her father's seat officially at tomorrow's meeting. A slow, horrifying realization began to dawn on Sterling's face. His eyes widened as he followed Carter's gaze back to the plane. Movement at the top of the stairs. First Officer Tim Rollins appeared, his face ashen. He stepped aside, and then she emerged. Eleanor Vance stood at the top of the stairs, framed by the cabin lights. She was still wearing the worn denim and the faded aviation jacket. Her canvas satchel was slung over her shoulder. She looked down at the assembled men on the tarmac, her expression not of anger, but of profound disappointment. Sterling stared, his mouth agape. Her? He whispered, the sound swallowed by the wind. That's the girl from 2B, the ground crew. She's not ground crew, Alan, Carter said, his voice laced with pity. She's the one who signs your paycheck. Or rather, she was. Ellie descended the stairs, each step echoing with a terrible finality on the metal treads. The silence on the tarmac was absolute, broken only by the distant scream of a departing jet. One of her jets. She stopped directly in front of Sterling, close enough to see the beads of sweat on his forehead. The 2 Port Authority officers moved to stand discreetly behind her, a silent affirmation of where the power now lay. Captain Sterling, she said, her voice calm and clear, yet it cut through the air like a turbine blade. You asked to see my boarding pass. You questioned my right to be in a seat I paid for. You threatened me. You lied about me in an official communication, attempting to weaponize law enforcement to conceal your own misconduct. She let each charge settle into the cold, wind-swept silence of the tarmac. You did all of this because you looked at me, and in the calculus of your own prejudice, you decided I was a variable that could be cancelled out. You decided I was worthless. Sterling, his face the color of bleached parchment, began to tremble. The swagger that had carried him down the stairs had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man shrinking inside his own uniform. Miss Vance, There's been a terrible misunderstanding, he stammered, the words catching in his throat. A mistake. If I had known who you were, I would never have— That, Ellie interrupted, her voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the very concrete beneath their feet, is the fundamental, catastrophic failure of your character. That is the rot. It should not matter who I am. My name, my title, my shareholdings, they are irrelevant. The contract is not with the CEO. It is with the passenger. The young woman with a paid ticket in seat 2B deserved the same dignity, the same adherence to protocol, the same basic human respect as the senator in 3B or the family in 32B. My father didn't build an airline of tiered humanity. He built an airline to move people, and you have spent years treating them like cargo, a principle you haven't forgotten, but actively chosen to despise. She held his gaze, not with anger, but with the detached, focused intensity of a surgeon about to make a critical incision. She turned her head slightly towards Ben Carter, never breaking eye contact with Sterling. Ben, the file. Carter, his expression grim, stepped forward and handed her a thick, ominous manila folder. Ellie didn't open it immediately. She let Sterling look at it, let him contemplate the sheer, damning weight of its contents. Captain Alan Sterling, she began, her voice a clinical recitation. I've had a long flight. I read this entire document twice. In the last 5 years alone, 4 separate passenger complaints citing demeaning and aggressive language, all of which were summarily dismissed by a supervisor you play golf with. 2 internal reports from junior flight attendants, both women, alleging verbal harassment and the creation of a hostile work environment. Both were resolved with a note in their files, not yours. A formal reprimand for deviating from approved flight plans over mountainous terrain to make up time, increasing fuel burn and putting unnecessary stress on the airframe. You weren't making a command decision today, Captain. You were simply running the latest iteration of a program you've been perfecting for 30 years. A program of arrogance, entitlement, and the abuse of power. She snapped the folder shut. The sound echoed across the tarmac, sharp and final as a gavel strike. Please, he begged, his composure finally disintegrating into raw, desperate panic. His eyes darted from Ellie to the impassive faces of the board members. Miss Vance, Eleanor, my career, 30 years. I have a family, a mortgage. So does Chloe, the flight attendant you publicly humiliated and silenced, Ellie retorted, her voice devoid of sympathy. So does First Officer Rollins, who I'm certain you've been browbeating for the entire flight for daring to question you. So did the maintenance chief in Denver you tried to have fired last year because he refused to sign off on a plane with a faulty sensor until it was fixed, a decision that likely saved lives. This company is supposed to be a family, Captain, but you are a pathogen, and my first duty as CEO is to protect the health of the organism. She turned to Carter, her expression hardening into one of absolute resolve. Ben, activate the termination clause for cause, gross misconduct, dereliction of duty, endangerment of company assets through reckless operation, and filing a fraudulent report in violation of federal aviation regulations. I also want a full legal review of the morality clause in his pension agreement. Carter nodded, his jaw tight. The clause is ironclad, Ellie. Conduct which brings the company into significant public disrepute or constitutes a moral failing results in the immediate forfeiture of all unvested pension benefits and severance. This more than qualifies. A strangled gasp escaped Sterling's lips. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. My pension? No, you can't. That's my entire life. everything I worked for." "And this airline was my father's," Ellie said, her voice now a whisper that was somehow more chilling than her anger. "You don't get to poison his life's work and then expect to be rewarded for it." She took a step back, creating a space that felt like a chasm. She then addressed the two Port Authority officers who had been watching the scene unfold with professional detachment. "Officers, my name is Eleanor Vance. I am the complainant in a false police report filed by this man, Alan Sterling. He knowingly and maliciously used the spectre of law enforcement in an attempt to intimidate a passenger and fabricate a justification for his own misconduct. I have the A-car's data logs, time-stamped and authenticated. I wish to press charges for filing a false report to a federal authority." "Yes, ma'am," the senior officer replied, his voice calm. He stepped forward, his hand moving to the handcuffs on his belt. Sterling's eyes bulged with primal terror. "No, wait, you can't. I am Captain Alan Sterling of Majestic Airlines." "Not anymore," Ellie said quietly. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping around Sterling's wrists was the only sound. It was the sound of a world ending. As they led him away, a babbling, broken man shouting about lawyers and misunderstandings, Ellie's unwavering gaze swept across the tarmac and landed on the last piece of the puzzle. Senator Harrison Albright had been attempting a slow, strategic retreat towards the black SUVs, his face a mottled canvas of fury and fear. "Senator!" Ellie's voice sliced through the air, stopping him cold. He spun around, a grotesque, sycophantic smile plastered on his face. "My dear young lady, what a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. A true comedy of errors. If only your staff had made it clear who you were." "My staff," Ellie corrected, her tone glacial, "performed their duties with professionalism until my captain, the man you just watched being arrested, overrode them at your behest. You demanded a seat that was not yours. You were a willing participant in the violation of company policy and federal regulations, all for the sake of your own comfort. You are not a victim of a misunderstanding, Senator. You are a symptom of the disease." She turned to Ben. "Ben, add Senator Albright's name to the corporate no-fly list. A lifetime ban. Effective immediately. Also draft a letter to the Senate Ethics Committee. Detail his attempt to leverage his official position for personal gain and his role in inciting a confrontation that required a law enforcement response. Attach the captain's A-car's log, the audio from the gate, and a sworn statement from flight attendant Chloe Jensen. Send it via courier in the morning." The senator's face cycled through shades of crimson and purple. "This is an outrage, an affront. You will be hearing from my office. I will have you investigated." "And you," Ellie replied, turning her back on him with deliberate finality, "will be flying commercial from now on. I suggest you learn to be on time for boarding." She finally faced the board of directors. They stared at her, these old lions of industry, their faces a mixture of shock, terror, and a dawning, grudging respect. They had expected a figurehead, a grieving daughter to be managed. They had just witnessed a public execution. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice weary but firm, her gaze sweeping over each of them. "The emergency meeting I called is now in session. The hangar will be our boardroom. We have an airline to rebuild, from the ground up." The air inside the executive hangar was cold and smelled of oil and ozone. The cavernous space, usually home to gleaming private jets, felt like a cathedral of judgment. The board members huddled together near a portable heater, clutching styrofoam cups of coffee, their expensive suits looking absurdly out of place. Ellie stood before them, the damning file still in her hand. The adrenaline from the tarmac had faded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She felt the immense weight of the power she had just wielded, the terrible responsibility of shattering a man's life. It brought her no joy, only a grim sense of necessity. "That spectacle," began Henderson, the oldest board member and her father's closest friend, his voice raspy. "Eleanor, that was reckless. A lawsuit is already a certainty. The PR fallout, arresting one of our most senior pilots on the tarmac. It's a nightmare." "The nightmare, Mr. Henderson," Ellie countered, her voice quiet but carrying in the acoustic space, was a 30-year career pilot who believed his authority was absolute. The nightmare was a culture of fear where a young flight attendant was too terrified to uphold company policy. The nightmare is the cracked tray table in seat 24A, the broken USB port, the filthy lavatory at the back of the plane. Because they all stem from the same source, a corporate culture that has forgotten who we serve. She walked over to a massive Rolls-Royce engine mounted on a display stand, a relic from one of her father's first planes. She ran her hand over the cool, smooth metal. "My father loved these. He said the health of an engine tells you everything. You look for stress fractures, signs of metal fatigue, corrosion. You don't ignore them. You don't paint over them. You address them before they cause catastrophic failure." She turned back to them. "Alan Sterling was a stress fracture we allowed to deepen for decades. His dismissal isn't a PR problem. It's the first step in repairing the engine. The lawsuit, we will fight it. We have cause, we have documentation, and we have the truth. The PR, I will handle it personally. I will tell the world that at Majestic Airlines, the rules apply to everyone, and dignity is not a premium upgrade." Ben Carter, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "She's right," he said, his voice firm. The last vestiges of his skepticism had been burned away on the tarmac. "Our customer satisfaction scores in economy have dropped for 8 consecutive quarters. Our employee turnover among junior cabin crew is the highest in the industry. We're bleeding money on fuel overages from pilots like Sterling, who fly their own routes. We've been treating the symptoms. Ellie just identified the disease." Ellie laid out her plan, not as a polished presentation, but as a raw, impassioned plea, a complete overhaul of the employee review and complaint system, with a new independent oversight committee. A walk-a-mile program requiring every executive, herself included, to spend 40 hours a year working on the ground, handling bags, checking in passengers, cleaning cabins. A reinvestment of capital into refurbishing the entire fleet, starting with the economy sections. The era of Majestic, being a private club for the privileged few, is over, she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. We will be an airline for everyone. Our new measure of success will not be the comfort of a senator in first class, but the loyalty of a family in the last row. That is my father's legacy, and that is our future. Later that night, in the sterile quiet of a corporate apartment overlooking the distant lights of Washington, D.C., Ellie stood by the window. The city glittered below, a sprawling constellation of lives and stories, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded on a forgotten strip of tarmac. She felt a profound sense of isolation. She had won. She had asserted her authority, defended her principles, and set her company on a new course. But the victory felt heavy, metallic on her tongue. She thought of Alan Sterling, sitting in a cold holding cell. She felt no pity for him, but she felt the gravity of her own actions. The power to create was a wonderful thing. Her father had possessed it in spades. But the power to destroy, she was discovering, left a scar on the one who wielded it. She had amputated a limb to save the body, but she would not forget the act of cutting. She picked up her phone and bypassed her contacts, dialing a number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Vance Aviation, this is Sal." It was Sal, the lead mechanic from Burbank, the man she'd been working with that morning, a lifetime ago. "Sal, it's Ellie." "Ellie, geez, kid, I saw the news alerts. All hell's breaking loose. You okay?" His concern was genuine, unvarnished. "I'm okay, Sal, just a long day." "I'll bet. Listen, what you did, what I heard you did, that bastard Sterling had it coming for years. He wrote up one of my best guys in Denver last year on a bogus charge. We all knew it. Nobody could touch him." There was a pause. "Your dad, he would have been proud, Ellie. He built this thing, but you reminded it what it was for." Tears pricked at the corners of Ellie's eyes, hot and sudden. It wasn't the board's grudging acceptance or Ben's newfound loyalty that reached her. It was the simple, heartfelt validation from a man with grease under his fingernails, a man who understood the heart of the machine. "Thanks, Sal," she whispered. "That means a lot. Get some rest." "You too, boss," he said, and the word for the first time felt right. 9 months later, the changes were no longer just plans on a whiteboard. They were a tangible reality. The Walk a Mile program had become legendary in the industry. Photos of Ellie Vance loading baggage at LAX and Ben Carter serving drinks on a red-eye to Chicago had gone viral. Employee morale had skyrocketed. The new anonymous reporting system had exposed and rooted out 2 more managers with Sterling's mindset. First Officer Tim Rollins, pale and quiet on the day of the incident, was now a captain. But more than that, he was the lead instructor at Majestic's new pilot training initiative, a program he had helped Ellie design, centered on crew resource management, de-escalation, and collaborative decision-making. He was molding a new generation of captains who led by respect, not by rank. Chloe Jensen was not a vice president. Ellie had offered her a fast-track management program, but Chloe had politely declined. "I love my job, Ms. Vance," she had said. "I just want to be able to do it without being afraid." Instead, Ellie had made her the inaugural head of the new Cabin Crew Council, an elected body with a direct line to the CEO's office, empowered to advocate for policy changes and workplace improvements. Her voice, once silenced by Sterling, now spoke for thousands. On the first anniversary of that flight, Ellie Vance was once again on MA 212. She had booked her ticket under a pseudonym, and she sat in seat 24A. The seat was different now. The plastic wasn't cracked. The upholstery was new. The USB port worked, and the high-speed Wi-Fi was complimentary for all passengers. She watched as a young flight attendant, no older than Chloe had been, knelt in the aisle to speak to a small, frightened child who was flying alone. The attendant spoke with such gentle kindness, drawing a smiley face on a napkin for him, that the boy's tears subsided into a shy smile. No one had ordered her to do it. It wasn't in a manual. It was a simple, unscripted act of human decency. As the plane began its takeoff roll, pressing her back into the seat, Ellie looked out the window. She saw the wing, the powerful engine she knew so intimately, and the vast, endless blue beyond. She didn't feel the triumphant satisfaction of a battle won. She felt something deeper, quieter, a sense of profound, purposeful peace. Her father had built the wings and the engine. He had given the airline its body. But a body without a soul is just a machine. Today, watching that small act of kindness in the aisle, she realized her job was different. Her job was to be the keeper of its heart. The plane climbed steadily, banking smoothly towards the east, not just heading in the right direction, but flying with a renewed and resonant purpose. It was a legacy no longer just inherited, but finally, truly, her own.